Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Extreme Heat and Climate Change, a Health Equity Crisis, hosted by our NDN Collective Climate Justice team. So my name is Kailea Frederick, and I am a member of the Climate Justice team. I have Tahltan and Casca First Nations lineage, and I'm also a Black American. And I have the pleasure of talking to you all today from my childhood home on the northeast side of the island of Maui on the lands of the Kanaka Maoli people. I will just provide a brief introduction to, NDN Collective for those of you who may not already be familiar. So we are an Indigenous-led organization that is dedicated to building Indigenous power through organizing, activism, philanthropy, grant making, capacity building, and narrative change. And we are about creating sustainable solutions on Indigenous terms. So we believe that our people really do have the creativity, innovation, and determination to build healthy, resilient futures, defending our homelands and rights, developing model regenerative nations, and decolonizing and healing our communities and families. And so our vision of climate justice at NDN Collective is really about bringing Indigenous people back into authority over their lands while building a just and renewable economy that is no longer dependent on extractive industry. So we are working towards a world where our communities and our land are coexisting in a state of liberation. And so this webinar series is a part of our, as I had mentioned, a part of our climate justice programming, where we are really aiming to provide educational resources on the various impacts of climate change at this moment in time, and trying to create supportive ways for people to create connections between their own lives and their own communities. And some of these, I would say sometimes more obvious and less obvious realities of living into a climate changed world, so that we have that opportunity to really hone in on what adaptation can look like for each of us. And so, just wanting to say that to learn more, the opportunity to learn more about our broader work at NDN Collective, you can visit our website at ndncollective.org. And we also are on all social media platforms under @NDN Collective. And I just want to say welcome, Jade. I know that you had something you needed to attend to right before this. And so we're just grateful you're able to log on. Hey, good to see you. I would love to pass it over to you just to provide a very brief introduction to yourself as our attendees are trickling in. And then from there, if you'd like to actually just pass it over to Gaurab, and he can also provide a short introduction as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Kailea. Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a good Friday morning. I'm Jade Begay. I'm the Climate Justice Campaign Director at NDN Collective. I use she, her pronouns, and I am Tesuque Pueblo and Diné. I'm also based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is Tewa territory, Pueblo territory. And so, yeah, streaming in from here, and thank you for patience as I join in and pop in. Very relevant to a health conversation. I was getting my my COVID booster, so yeah, that is all well and good. Grateful for science, and with that, I mean, yeah, easy transition over to Dr. Basu to introduce himself and talk more about yeah, how he comes to this work, and where he is also based and works. And yeah, so over to you, Dr. Basu.
Thank you. And everyone, please call me Gaurab. My name is Gaurab Basu. I'm a primary care doctor, and my work is in clinical work in a community health safety health system. And I work in Somerville, Massachusetts, on Massachusetts land, and work in a really wonderful community health center there, and have come to do a lot of education work in health equity. So I do a lot of work in teaching health professionals about social justice, health equity, and my passion in climate justice really developed only about 5 years ago, honestly. My background is in global health, and human rights, and was informed by the experience of my family and my parents, who are immigrants from India. And so I'm really grateful to join you all today. It's a real pleasure and honor, and just working with Kailea and Jade and Angie has been wonderful. So I really am grateful for this conversation. We have a few things to present, and then look forward to getting into conversation. So pleasure to be here with you, and I'll pass it back to Kailea.
Thank you. And then also just wanting to presence, we have a few other team members with us. So we have Lorenzo Serna, who is supporting us on some back-end streaming support across some of our platforms. So just wanting to name who's here with us. And then we also have Angie Saloa, who is our digital organizer and has poured so much, just I would say time, energy, and attention to detail into making sure that this webinar could happen. And Angie is also providing back-end support as well. And so just wanting to say thank you so much. It's always a team effort, putting together any type of our programming. So we're just really grateful, that we can have some additional hands on deck for this moment this morning. So, wanting to just name that over the last years, all of us across Turtle Island have seen and experienced, more so than seen, really just felt in our own bodies, heat waves that have taken a toll on our people, impact our food and cultural ways, and become more intense and frequent over the years. So the reality of climate change and global warming really is something I think we're all becoming intimately familiar with. Yet we don't often, I think, especially when it comes to extreme heat, have all of the information to prepare and adapt for. And so that's why we're gathered here today, to have the opportunity to learn from Gaurab. But before we jump into it, we actually wanted to open up a brief little poll, because one thing that Jade and I know so well is that oftentimes when we are opening up a conversation around climate change, one of, I think, the best ways to start is giving people the opportunity to reflect on what, why it is they're here, or how it is they're experiencing in their own, an impact in their own life. So just as like a little brief grounding exercise, we're gonna put this poll up. And so Jade, if you wanna, I know that that's on your end.
Yes, and I am going to launch this question. I hope it works. Okay, so this is awesome. We get to see in real time action on the poll. We'll share the answer in a bit, but the question, just to read it aloud, is: have you experienced a high heat day or days this summer? For example, yes, temperatures over 90 degrees, and maybe even to support your answer, have you experienced just abnormal heat in your locale, in your region? Okay, I'm seeing the poll is starting to slow down. All right, well, let's share this one. Can you all see? Oh, there we go. Okay, so majority, yes, almost 95% of you all have experienced a high heat day or days this summer. So yes, you are with folks who are experiencing common things, and that's not surprising. I mean, we know so well on the climate justice team that climate change is being felt everywhere. I think one headline or one infographic I saw this summer was "Everywhere is the front lines of climate change now." So this is very telling. All right. Is that are we going to do all the questions? Okay, great. I'll keep going. This is the second question. Have you or a loved one experienced heat stress? And I think, yeah, we can explain a little bit about heat stress being, experiencing just blatant impacts from heat, whether that's heat strokes and those types of illnesses. Maybe Dr. Basu, you can chime in here with defining heat stress.
Yeah, and any kind of symptoms where when it's really kind of when you're not feeling good, when it's really hot. If you're lightheaded, you're feeling headaches, you feel tired, you feel lethargic. It's really kind of a broad comment on any symptoms because it's hot, you're not feeling good. Thank you.
I know I feel agitated. Like that's a real thing that I feel. I feel like I can't operate at 100%. So my work is impacted if I'm in a place, and we'll get into story sharing a little bit more. But for instance, my home doesn't have AC. So if I'm in my home and it's just hot, like I lose sleep. There's all these impacts. So, okay, the poll is slowing down. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So again, quite a lot of you, and then some unsures. So that's helpful information just to for us to know how to speak to breaking down what heat stress is. I think that's something that just education that's kind of needed across our communities. Okay, so last poll. Cooling centers. Do you know where your community cooling centers are? And a cooling center, just to define that, is a place where you can go. It's often city organized. So your city will most likely organize a space, be it like a high school gym or some type of, big space like this, where people can go to just sit indoors and escape heat. Like I said, my home doesn't have AC, and that's a common thing for lots of Americans. So, nowadays cities are implementing this strategy to save lives and keep people safe during heat waves. All right, the poll is slowing down. I'm going to share the results. So also very interesting results here. No is the common answer. And that is very helpful information, not just, for us as climate justice organizers, but I'm sure for you as well, Dr. Basu, that there's just, again, lots of education needed around strategies to keep our communities and our people cool during heat, high heat moments or heat waves. So we got our work cut out for us. And we're not even, deep into the webinar. All right, well, thank you everyone for participating in those. Oops, sorry, I meant to stop sharing. Thank you everyone for participating in those polls.
And I think we can bring the presentation up now. And I would love to have hand it over now to Gaurab, who is really gonna get us started.
Okay.
And I'm curious, Angie, are you going to be pulling the presentation up, or is that something that comes in on your end, Jade?
Jade, if you don't mind, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. I just give me one moment.
I've got it too, Jade, if you need that.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. I am just technically challenged. So one sec, with Zoom especially, all the new features. Okay, here we go. And I think that is, let me go into, okay. Can people see that?
Jade, would you mind just scrolling it to the first one?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, there we go. Okay,
Yep.
great. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
There's a lot of bells and whistles on these, so I hear you. Well, again, thank you so much. I hope this is conversation. What I have come to really believe about these big, painful, hard, overwhelming issues that we face is that we've got to do it in community with community, to share our stories, to take care of each other. For me, climate change is about taking care of our Earth, each other, and future generations. And I'm grateful to be able to do that with you all today. And again, we developed this together with the climate justice team. So grateful for everyone who was involved in putting this together. So we'll do next slide. Yeah, I gave you a little bit of my background. I'll just mention again that I run a center here called the Center for Health Equity, Education, and Advocacy. The idea there, again, is that, I love being a doctor. I love taking care of my patients. I've known them a long time now. And I want to serve them well when they're in the clinic and give them good advice. But it's clear that so many of the issues that we face here are these broader structural issues that we've got to work with courage and with urgency to address. And so our center tries to support health professionals to be good advocates in that work. And I teach at the public health school and medical school here, and I'm kind of in charge of the climate curriculum for our medical students, which I really enjoy teaching them. Yeah, next slide. So I always start, when I start any conversation about climate justice, just to take a moment to just recognize this is an emotional issue. It's a spiritual issue, and it's really disorienting to feel the ways in which the things we know and love, the spaces, the places that we know and love are threatened in increasing ways. This is not a new phenomenon. We have been experiencing the impacts of climate change for a long time, but it is hard to see your community and your land and water be changing, to see what's happening in Pakistan, to see the drought, to see, my partner comes from generations of gardeners. Her family passed on real skills and love of gardening. And so we have young children and we have a little garden outside, and that's a big part of our summers. And we had some real heat this summer, and we saw it. We saw it in the garden, and it didn't grow the way it usually does. And so when you see that, and these things that we do are so tied to the things and people we love, it's really hard. And so I just want to acknowledge that and make that a part of this conversation, and so have that inform the way that we engage with this work. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to start with a little nerdy background. When I started doing this, right, to go back and remember what I was supposed to learn when I was in high school, I guess. But let me just mention up front what this greenhouse effect is. All right, many of you have probably heard this term, greenhouse effect. So that is at the heart of anthropogenic or human-made greenhouse gases. That's what fossil fuels burn. So carbon dioxide, methane, those are major gases that we as humans have put into our climate. So let me explain how that works at a basic level. Is that these gases are coating our atmosphere, and there's in its natural state, there's an equilibrium in which you can see these yellow rays, and those are called solar rays. So those come down from the sun, and they come down into our atmosphere and kind of bounce around. So some hit the land, some bounce back out of the atmosphere, some stay in the atmosphere. They're kind of moving in all these different directions. And then infrared, which is the red rays here, start at the land level, and they move up through the atmosphere. And again, they have their own way. Some stay in the atmosphere, some move out, some go in this direction or that direction. But our natural state is that there's an equilibrium among all these rays, and there's a certain way in which that warming manifests on our planet. What these gases do is that they're heat trapping gases. So they hold these rays in, so many of them can't escape. And that's what causes the warming, is these rays are held in and have caused extraordinary levels of warming, especially since the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. Next slide. All right, I'm going to go through a couple of these. They're a little data heavy, and I just want to make kind of one overall message. So I won't get into every detail of all these graphs, but this shows globally the amount of carbon dioxide that has been made by humans and put into our atmosphere in time over time. So this is, I guess, the last 30 years or so. And you can see there's little bumps at certain times when there's certain political or economic events, and probably the most relevant is COVID here. At the end, we decreased emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions, by 5.4% in 2020. And there was a real hope that we would have learned our lesson. And when we were, and this was, of course, because of all the lockdowns across the world, that the hope was that we would be learning to work in a new way in which we wouldn't be causing as many emissions. But you can see we've bumped back up in 2021, and we'll see what 2022 shows us. But we're basically kind of flat here. And we need to aggressively, ambitiously, urgently be decreasing our emissions. The UN tells us about 7.6% every single year. And so that curve needs to go down and needs to go down quickly. And so we've got a lot of progress we need to make. Next slide. And I just make a point here that the United States really is culpable because carbon dioxide stays in our atmosphere for hundreds of years, like 300 years. And so over the history of the last couple hundreds of years, we have disproportionately put so many of these emissions into our atmosphere. And while countries like China right now are getting a lot of attention for they have the highest emissions in a given year, we really got to think about this throughout history and who has put those in. And what is at the heart of this climate justice work, of course, is so many of you are working on, is recognizing that countries like the United States have disproportionately caused the harm, and poor communities, global communities, communities that are developing economically are bearing the burden of this disproportionately. And that's wrong, in a moral sense, in a justice sense, that's absolutely wrong. Next. We can go to the next slide.
Thank you. Yeah, I just, it just kind of disappeared on me. Sorry about that.
Okay. That's okay.
Oh, how do I go? Okay, there we go. There we go.
All right, and these I'm going to just be really brief about, but I just want to give a little sense of what are causing these carbon dioxide emissions. Is transportation, power in the green there is our electricity, so what turns the lights on and things like that. Industry is things like cement and steel, building buildings, making the supplies of these things. And then buildings is things like warming our water and rooms. And so those are the sources of emissions that come out there. And then on the next slide, okay. So the next slide here, what I wanted to show was that for me, at least, when I started doing this work, I'll be very honest with you, when people cited things like 1.5 degrees Celsius, the Paris Accord has said that, as a goal, 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, that is clearly not a good enough target because we have waited so long with that as the global agreement now to try to keep emissions to that level. I used to think like, what 1.5 degrees Celsius doesn't seem so bad. What does that really mean? And, as a doctor now, I think of it of like, if my temperature increased 1.5 degrees Celsius is something like 3 degrees Fahrenheit, if my body was 3 degrees hotter, if I was always at 101, I'd be running a fever all the time. And that's the way we've got to think about it with the globe. And so I'm not going to go through every one of these bars, but these are in the millions of people. And you can look at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Look, that's 3.9 billion people that are exposed to heat waves. And the poll that Jay did at the front show that we're all experiencing this. And you can look at these graphs and see how much worse the numbers get. Let's just take heat waves and go through these different numbers. At 1.5 degrees of global warming, 3.9 billion would be impacted by heat waves. If you go to the second 2 degrees Celsius, that's 5.9 billion people. And then you go to 3 and it's 7.9. I mean, these are extraordinary numbers. And I'm not going through the other bars, but we're talking about water stress, even running out of water, impacts on our power, so that, blackouts so that we don't have power, like whether our crops will grow and what kind of habitat degradation we do. So they're major. This is disheartening, and this is a lot to take. And I always get a little overwhelmed when I see these numbers. Another way to look at this is that the choices we make will have an extraordinary impact on hundreds of millions of people's lives. And so it's critical that we do this work together. Okay. All right, so this is about heat. So you're saying, Gaurab, you're talking a lot about all these big things. We haven't even talked about heat yet. So we'll focus on heat now. I just want to make a quick outline of how I think the ways that the burning of fossil fuels, ecological degradation, air pollution, how does that impact health? So here are the 9 ways I think that climate change, that environmental justice, the burning of fossil fuel impacts health equity. And that's natural disasters and extreme weather, food insecurity, water scarcity, and I'll add to that, water quality and quantity. Some places are in drought, other places are in flooding. Number 4, infectious diseases. As we change our, if we do activities like deforestation, it increases the risks of future pandemics. And then number 5, here's the one we'll focus on, is heat-related diseases. We'll get into that in great detail. Air pollution. Jade was talking about this, the impacts of mental health, and then forced migration, political conflict are things that we need to really lock in on as central impacts on people's health and health equity and health rights because of the impacts of climate change. Next slide. Okay, so I'll tell you about a patient of mine. I've written about this patient, and this patient has asked me to write about his case, but he was a 30-year-old male who pretty healthy, had a little bit of asthma, and had come to the United States about 5 years ago from Central America, where he was a farmer. And he was a parent of a young child. His partner was saying, hey, you're having these cold, URI is upper respiratory infection, having some cold symptoms, but then it was getting worse. So he was getting short of breath and was feeling orthopnea, which means when he was laying down, he was feeling really short of breath. He was having headache and fatigue. And then he hadn't established care with the doctor in the United States yet, and came to our emergency room. And very tragically, these labs showed that his kidneys were in failure. They weren't working anymore. And so the kidneys work to move fluid through our body. We urinate out so that we keep good fluid balance. And his kidneys had stopped working quite literally. And he had to emergently go into the hospital and start dialysis, which is, of course, where a machine is helping filter your fluids in your body and takes over the functions of a kidney. And after a very long evaluation, a lot of times diabetes or blood pressure are usually the causes of kidney disease and kidney failure. This was a young, healthy man who he was just completely devastated by this diagnosis. It completely upended his life. And as the evaluation went through, it was this phenomenon CKDU, which is kind of a funny name, chronic kidney disease of unknown origin, which in short, I'm confident that his exposure to extreme heat as a farmer back home, day in and day out, since he was a teenager, had caused him to get dehydrated, so that the blood flow to his kidneys was decreasing, and his kidney was getting injured a little bit every day, such that he presented, 15 years later to the hospital, and his kidneys had shriveled up and were not functioning anymore. And that's the way this happens. You don't really know until it stops working how much injury there is. And so I became this patient's primary care doctor, and it was just, for me, the intersection of so many critical issues. First of all, his experience in the U.S. healthcare system and xenophobia, the impacts of who is providing nourishment and food for us, the labor that they have to offer, the risks to their body that they're risking, and the ways in which we cannot close our eyes to the way a changing planet is impacting health. And that was a real wake-up moment. That was part of my awakening to issues of climate change and health equity. And I care about this patient so much. I see him, and he's been just, so trying to be persistent and resilient, but has clearly upended his life. All right, next slide. So what I'll say about heat is that heat impacts everything I care about as a doctor. It basically impacts all of our organs. And so I'm just going to go through some of these, but it can cause headaches. It can cause strokes, actually, when we're exposed to dangerous heat. It can cause increased risk of heart attack and COPD and asthma exacerbations. When it's really hot outside, things like ozone get stuck in our atmosphere, so pollutants are worse. For my patient, his kidneys were impacted. Our liver can be impacted. I think I'm going to speak about this later, but obstetrical outcomes can be impacted. For pregnant people who are out in the heat, there's risks of premature labor and low birth weight. And so heat is an impact on everything. And I think I'm glad Jane mentioned at the top that often mental health is left out of this conversation. It really, I see it as a doctor as one of the top things, that people are more anxious. There's increased risks of depressive episodes during dangerous heat. And so that's a big part of how heat impacts our health as well. Next slide. And so, what is a heat wave? We hear this word heat wave. There's different categorizations. We'll go through some of them. The big message here is that we got to take heat seriously and have a consciousness of when we're hearing that heat is coming upon us in our communities, we got to be prepared. But we'll go through a couple definitions just to give some orientation. But a heat wave is a period of high heat and humidity with temperatures over 90 degrees for at least 2 to 3 days. So 90 is often a time, if I see a weather forecast in which 90 degrees is predicted for a number of days, that catches my attention. And I really think about, okay, this is going to be a spell here where we need to be careful. And so that's maybe a number to keep in mind. And so the body works, and another slide right after this, the body works, we need our body to stay at there's a very small window in which our body works right, at what temperature our body works right. And so our body is working really hard to keep that temperature. But heat is actually responsible for the most weather-related deaths. And the thing is, when we see a big flood or we see a hurricane, there's a dramatic nature to those extreme weather events that sometimes heat does not capture the attention the same way. And I think that's why the climate justice team wanted to present this as such an important issue to talk about, because it can be more insidious. It can be more quietly impacting us. And this point about warm nights, I wanted to elevate because it can be really hot during the day. But the way our body works is that it's working throughout the day to kind of keep our body temperature normal. And then at nighttime, we're supposed to kind of relax a little bit because the temperatures go down and our body doesn't have to work quite as hard to keep that temperature. And one of the most dangerous things about climate change is that it doesn't cool down as much. So part of it is, increasing the heat, the days of over 90 degrees, that increases. But part of it is it doesn't cool down and the rhythms of the days are changing in terms of the temperature. And then I'm going to talk about heat stroke actually on a slide or two later, so I'll skip that for now. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through all of this. This is kind of from a medical journal, but I thought maybe I'd just present this diagram and just walk through a couple pieces to show how much our body is doing to address heat. So when heat is upon us, our body recognizes it and says, hey, I got to keep my body in check. I got to make sure everything's working okay. So as heat is around us, our body works to dissipate that heat so it doesn't get absorbed inside of us. And so what happens? So when it's very hot outside, our core temperature increases, but we sweat. So that's a way we release heat from inside our body. And then our heart rate thing. Think about when you're exercising, right? Your body is doing a bunch of things so that you don't get too hot. It's almost like you're exercising, but you're not when it's a heat wave out there. And your body is doing a lot of similar things to try to get rid of that heat so it's not absorbed inside of you. So that's the top there. That's called compensate. That's a compensated response to heat, dangerous heat. At the bottom here is when your body can't keep up anymore. So it's trying to do all those things, but it can't, and the temperature stays high inside of you. And then so things like cells die, the way that fluid moves through your GI system changes, your cardiovascular system can't keep up, and there's a lot of inflammation in your body. And that can kind of create cascades and hormonal responses, where it impacts all those organs. When I had that diagram of the body and all the different organ systems, that's when all that stuff happens because of an inflammatory response. And then at its worst case, it's a heat stroke, which is the most dangerous one. Next slide. All right, I'm going to go a little faster. I feel like I'm going a little slow here because we got a lot to get through. But I just wanted to make a point. There's different grades of this. So there's heat exhaustion, and you can see here the different symptoms that you can have. And basically, it's just a gradation where it can get worse. In heat stroke, you'll see very high temperature, you'll be really red, hot, have dry skin. So all of this is a spectrum. You can have mild symptoms from heat stress, you can have serious heat exhaustion, or at its worst case, heat stroke is like an emergency where people need to be in the hospital right away. So know that any hint of any of these symptoms, it's really important to be seen right away and to take it seriously because these cascades can develop in which it's unsafe for you. Next slide. Okay, so let me run through a few things, and then Kailea and Jade are really going to kind of bring us home to here's the things you got to do. But let me mention a few things of kind of like how to stay cool during the day. So that what I would just say is it's important for us to understand when a hot day is upon us, and even to have a list that like many of us are working so hard, or we're so busy, we're running around trying to take care of our families, trying to take care of our days, and we can kind of forget to take care of ourselves. And it's critical as we're having increasing days of heat that we have that consciousness. So if you're feeling, again, dizzy, weak, if you're not feeling well, it's important to be checked out right away. But staying well hydrated is critical. All right, staying hydrated and trying to be in a cool place is really important. That could mean things like usually I work on a high floor in my home, and you might need to go to the basement. It might be, like Jade was saying, to think about a cooling center, even if there's no cooling systems in your home. And don't be shy about talking to your doctor if there's something you're not sure about. But things like if you're having hot, dry skin, if you're not sweating, that's often a thing. If you're not finding yourself like you stop sweating as much, that's a sign that your body's not compensating enough. And a critical thing here is to try to take care of each other. Try to be thinking about folks who are out there who might need help. Studies have shown that one of the highest predictors of who dies during a heat wave is people who are isolated and lonely. So social connectivity is really critical. And we got to take care of each other. So if someone's not feeling it, put them in a cool place, have them lie down, make sure they're having good flow, put ice packs, things like that. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So have just a few minutes left here. So let me make a few points here. So who is most impacted if we're thinking about who we should be keeping an eye on? The young and the elderly. This is an issue of structural racism. The way that we have built our fossil fuel infrastructure, places that have tree canopies that cause greatly, a lot more shade, have been found to be racist. The fact that some communities have these tree canopies and some don't. I talked about social isolation, the home setting, be thinking about, I know Jay's going to talk to you a little bit about heat pumps is this new way in which we're not using energy and causing the problems of climate change, but cooling our homes. If you have chronic medical issues, that's something to be aware of. If you're pregnant, and occupational risks, people who are working in factories, people who are working outdoors are critical. And then if you're an athlete, you should really be keeping an eye on what your practice should be when it's really hot. Just to put in kind of stark terms, we now, climate change has gotten so bad that scientists have now been able to say that 1/3 of all heat-related diseases could be tied to climate change. And the CDC has shown that Indigenous communities have the highest rates of heat-related deaths. Next. Okay, I'm going to actually skip this slide. What I'll just say is that, here in Boston, it just shows, historically, there's been like 11 days of heat that's over 90 degrees. That's going to go to like 40 by 2030 and 90. So I just want to make the point that increasing days of over 90 degrees of heat are coming upon us. I think we're all seeing it, and it's really important to realize how this is changing. All right, and I just, again, we're going to really focus, to close up our conversation with Jade and Kailea about what to do to protect yourself. I do just, I made this point, I guess, a couple of times already here, but on the right side here, Dr. Kamara Jones has this definition of structural racism. She's been a real pioneer in structural racism in health as a physician. And she defines structural racism as a system of opportunity and assigning value based on structuring the social interpretation of how one looks, such that it unfairly disadvantages some individuals and some communities, unfairly advantages other individuals and communities, and it saps the strength of our whole of society. You know, that's how this manifests. The study on the left side here showed that red line communities, they took 108 different communities. Red line communities were 2.6 degrees Celsius hotter than non-red line communities. And that shows up in the lack of green space and tree canopies, as I touched upon before. So there's these bigger systems at play that disproportionately causes the impacts of heat on different communities. And while we need to, people, you know, on the climate justice team are working on the policy oriented things here, and that's a critical part of mitigation as we're doing the work of kind of responding day to day to these impacts. Okay. Yeah, and there's a term called heat islands. So what happens is in urban settings, often what will happen is because of the concrete and the industrial spaces, the lack of trees, some, you know, neighboring communities that some wealthy, some not wealthy, poor communities can be like 20 degrees hotter than a neighboring community because of this heat island effect and because of the concrete and cement that's there compared to other communities. So that's something to be aware of. Okay, I actually already spoke about this. So the impacts of heat on obstetrical outcomes, both air pollution and heat have been shown to cause low birth weight, premature birth, and stillbirths. And when they did a sub-analysis of this, they did find in this study that that Black people were disproportionately impacted. So that's just an example of the equity implications of this. Next slide. All right, and again, you know, heat impacts our food systems, our water supplies. You're all in the across the country, really, but especially in the West here, are seeing the impacts of droughts, and you know, it's a threat to our ability to provide, you know, food. And this is in a world in which so many communities are water scarce and food insecure already. Okay, I will pass it over to Kailea and Jane.
Thank you so much for all of that, Gaurab, and you know, wanting to also just say that there's so much to share on this topic, and we feel more than aware as the climate justice team that an hour is just not sufficient. And you know, we want to just really thank Dr. Basu for taking the time to provide us, you know, really just some initial thoughts on extreme heat and the impacts on our bodies and the impacts on our you know, different vulnerable populations. But also wanting to say too that our team is going to be following up over the next month, over the next year, with additional resources on extreme heat. And so this won't be the only opportunity. And also following this presentation, we will be sharing out the recording of this and also the presentation. So all, you know, you don't even have to worry about screenshotting any of this information. It will just come straight to your inbox. So yeah, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about how to prepare your body, your home, and your community. And so starting out here with our body, you know, when we know that there's going to be an extreme heat day, you know, taking cool showers is an effective way to try to cool the body down. You can also try to use, you know, just like a cool sponge bath or a foot bath is a really lovely way to do that. Thinking about wearing loose fitting clothing of natural materials. If you're going outside, always applying sunscreen, wearing that really wide brimmed hat, a pair of sunglasses. You know, making your bed accordingly, you know, so using light bed linen and sheets, you know, making sure to switch over from that, the winter linens, I think is really critical. Hydrating regularly. This is something I think we all know, but oftentimes we forget, especially as adults. Maybe we like start out our morning with coffee and then maybe there's more coffee. But on really hot days, it's important that we are hydrating regularly and trying to actually limit the amount of caffeine, sugary drinks, and that would also include alcohol because they're naturally dehydrating. And then eating more small meals more often is a way to also not, I think we all know in the afternoon, if we eat a large meal, we feel very tired, especially on a very hot day. I mean, I think this is all something, tips that we're all kind of aware of. It's just good to be reminded of. So yeah, next slide, please. So how to prepare your home. This is something that my family puts a big emphasis in because I live in Sonoma County, California, where we have a lot of high heat days. So the evening before a high heat day, we actually open up and I'll just say too, we don't have AC in our home and we have a very large western facing window. So we put a huge emphasis on opening up our entire home, the doors and the windows the night before. And then we get up really early in the morning and we do that again. And then just as soon as it starts to heat up because of the sun, as we start to get more into the morning, we close the entire house off. And that actually has proven to be pretty effective in terms of getting us through most of the day. But if we're having extreme heat over, 3 days of time, it can be challenging to cool everything because the evenings can be warm as well. So, we also have window covers that we pull, blackout curtains, shutters, draperies, awnings. These are like effective ways to try to just literally like repel heat away from coming in, absorbing into your home. And then hanging wet towels is also another really cool trick. Just noting that in California, that works well because it's very dry. And so adding a bit of humidity is not an issue. Here in the Hawaiian Islands, I would not be hanging wet towels on a high heat day because it's very humid. So, it's just kind of dependent on where you live. Next slide, please, Jade. And then how to prepare your community, how to prepare your community. So, there's a big emphasis right now throughout California, but I think it's everywhere as we're becoming aware that on these high heat days, it really stresses our grid. And so part of making sure that we don't go into a community-wide outage, making sure that you always are keeping your doors and windows closed, especially when AC is on, but being really strategic too about when you run AC. And making sure that you're unplugging appliances and overall just trying to not use too much electricity during these days. One of the things in Sonoma County and other parts of California that is happening now is we actually have planned rolling power outages. So on extreme heat days, it will go, throughout the community, it will be segments at a time. So we will, like one portion of the town I live in will not have power for X amount of hours, and then the next portion of the community. And so that's a way that our community is working at trying to not stress out our grid. But it's a problem, especially when we're thinking about vulnerable populations, people who need electricity or power because of maybe they're hooked up to a dialysis machine. And so it just takes a lot of, I would say, in general, like thinking ahead and making sure that if you are a part of a vulnerable population or have family members that are, being clear about making sure they're in the right place at the right time during maybe a rolling power outage, or if a power outage happens because the grid is overstressed. And that kind of leads into just overall like it's like you're part of a community. And so thinking about like your family, your friends, any elders in your life, that's like a big thing that I like to put an emphasis on. Neighbors who spend a lot of time maybe alone, our construction workers, our farm workers, I would say are major points. Those kinds of communities are like, we need to be rallying around them and providing advocacy as a part of how it is that we support the working conditions that they're a part of. I think it's important to always be discussing heat waves with your family and making sure that people know where to go, where to spend time, where their cooling centers are. And then, getting training. Taking a first aid course is a really great way to know how to treat a heat emergency or other emergencies, as we live into, I think, a time that is marked by so much crises. So just in general, knowing how to respond is, I think, so crucial. And I'm going to pass it over to Jade now.
Thank you, Kailea. All right, so just continuing on with more preparation. So how to get through a hot day or a day that may be going through a heat wave or is just a high heat day. So planning is important. Just these days, I think most of the time we have a little bit of a heads up from like our local news or even national news around one region might be expecting a heat wave at this, in a week, or sometimes we're given that heads up. So if you're tuning into the news or even seeing, headlines on social media about a heat wave coming into your region, just taking time to think of how to prepare and to plan ahead. And this goes for your home and your community, but also your workplace. How can we build culture in our workplaces where, it's if we, like NDN, for example, we have a national team. And so say, Kailea's community is going through a heat wave. How can, Kailea be sharing with me and our other team members, like, this is going to be something we're experiencing, and I might not have power. I might, be a little less like operating at 100% or on my A game, and really making that those adjustments within the workplace and really respecting, the needs of people. I think that is something that in our work cultures, in our families, etc., we'll just have to keep adapting, to the real physical needs that occur during these climate impact moments. Continuing down the list, avoiding going outside during the hottest time of the day, which I believe is around like noon to like 4 p.m. At least that's just my experience here in the high desert of New Mexico. Those are usually like the times of day where there's just the hottest temperatures. So avoiding strenuous physical activity if you can. If you're able to, just reducing how much output you're putting out and conserving energy. Just if you must do strenuous activity, to do it during the coolest part of the day, which is usually between 4 in the morning and 7 a.m. So stay in the shade. But before we mentioned, getting protective gear, hats, and things like this that can just protect you if you're walking around or if you work outside, but also choosing to be in place, or trying to be and choosing to be in places that are shaded. And do not leave children or animals in parked vehicles. This is critical and so important. It's very easy for animals and kids to be impacted in a very short amount of time in vehicles that are overheating. So just do not do this or leave animals or children at home with loved ones or in some type of care if you're having to go run errands or be out and about. So keeping your medicines at, in cool, dark places. I think we all are all familiar with that recommendation when we, with our medicines or with even our supplements. I take a lot of supplements just to, sustain my well-being, and even those require to be kept in cool places. So yeah, just a reminder that that's really important, just to continue with supporting our health and well-being. And you can store them also in the refrigerator. So this has come up a couple times. It's just, if you are experiencing symptoms, just, seeking medical advice is really important. But especially if you are suffering from chronic medical conditions or taking multiple medications, it's important to be in communication with your doctors, your healers, what have you, around how to prepare for these moments, and what are their recommendations. If hopefully some of you have trusted relationships with your physicians or your doctors or healers, and so just I think that is part of planning ahead, is seeking that advice and making sure that you have a plan in place when there is a heat wave or when we are expecting high temperatures. And if it is not possible to keep your cool home, try to spend a few hours from the day in a cool place, in a public building. I know this is challenging with health concerns around the pandemic, but I think a go-to pre-pandemic for my family growing up, when it was like super, super hot, was movie theaters or shopping centers, which we're not totally advocating for overconsumption, but they are cool, and that's really important that we take care of ourselves in that way. So just mapping out some places in your community where you can go to spend some time in some cool zones. Oops. Oh. Okay. Did you have any thoughts on the last slide, Kailea, before I move to the next? Okay. Dr. Basu, I'm going to move into call to actions here. An exciting portion. Okay. All right. Well, so I think, there was a lot of kind of intersecting issues brought up throughout the conversation today. And so I really wanted to just bring it into what we can do to take action around, this larger problem, this larger challenge, which is climate change, right? So, what are the things we can do to reduce the rate at which the climate is changing, therefore hopefully reducing the number or the frequency or the intensity of heat waves. And so I wanted to name some call to actions. First and foremost, we're really concerned about just preparing, because whether we take climate action and whether our nations and governments take climate action today or tomorrow, we're still going to be dealing with climate change for years to come. And so it's really important that we just take seriously preparation in our homes and in our workplaces and in our communities. So that's why we did this webinar, and we'll be sharing resources afterwards and as time goes on, because we just really want folks to have the knowledge, the information, and the tools to deal with these climate change impacts like heat and heat waves. So that's first and foremost. The second note here, I wanted to just mention a big moment that just occurred for the climate justice movement and environmental justice movement, which is the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is a policy package that just passed the Senate and the House, I believe in early August. And included in the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, is a lot of resources, a lot of funding for cities, towns, but also organizations, also tribal nations, to become more climate resilient and to update infrastructure so that we are better prepared for whether it be heat waves or floods or wildfires. And so I really encourage folks to look into the IRA and to see what is within this package. I also want to note that policies, big policy packages like this are really wonky. They're really hard to navigate. So please see NDN Collective, especially our team, Kailea and myself, as a resource to navigate this policy package. We are working on a breakdown of all the benefits in this package for tribes and Indigenous communities specifically, so that we can, just make sure that people know exactly what's in this package and how to use it, how to apply it to their organizations or to their communities to, update infrastructure or get more funding into their community to strengthen climate resilience or climate adaptation. So look out for that resource. But there are other organizations doing similar work. Rewiring America, which we might be able to drop a link to in the chat. They've done an excellent job of breaking down this package and showing us what's in there to decarbonize our homes and decarbonize our buildings and our cities and towns, but also what's there for what kind of incentives are there for homeowners, which brings me to this next point around learning about state incentives. So currently, in addition to what is included in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a ton of money for homeowners to get more efficient appliances, to bring down, to have better heating and cooling, but also to decarbonize. There are also state incentives. So for instance, in California, there's lots of state incentives to bring in heat pumps, which are an appliance that can better or more efficiently heat your home and also cool your home. And so I just wanted to name drop heat pumps as a tool, as an appliance, as a piece of equipment that can really be supportive in the coming seasons where we experience warmer temperatures. The name is kind of misleading, but they also do help with cooling. And then I just wanted to uplift participating in electoral processes. So this year is a midterm year. November 8th is voting day for midterms, where we get to re-elect state officials as well as members of the House, so Congress members and members of the Senate. So this is a critical time to elect people who are running on platforms that center climate justice. We heard over the course of this presentation that everything from fossil fuels obviously contribute to climate change, therefore high heat temperatures. And so really choosing elected leaders and leaders who are prioritizing, driving down fossil fuel development, things like this, who are supporting more rights for gender equity issues, for housing justice issues, so that all of these issues are tied, as we're learning in this conversation today. So we need to be really concerned about who is running and what positions are up for election this November and engaging in that process and getting out the vote, and supporting our community to vote. You know, there's a lot of barriers because of gerrymandering and because of the GOP attacking voter rights. So how can we also be involved in ensuring that our community members, our family members are able to get to the polls this November? And then one thing I just wanted to mention in kind of relation to all of this is a moment we're in where Senator Joe Manchin is trying to move through a policy, a piece of legislation called the Permitting Reform Act, or Permitting Reform Bill, rather. And this bill is being attached to the Inflation Reduction Act in a very sneaky and corrupt way. So in order for Joe Manchin to sign off on the IRA, he put in addition this permitting reform bill, which will fast track fossil fuel development, which will reduce and diminish and dismantle critical environmental protections like the National Environmental Protection Act, like the Clean Water Act. And so, you know, again, we need to drive down fossil fuel development in order to keep our planet healthy and safe for years and generations to come. So in this moment, it's a really good time to reach out to your senators, reach out to your Congress members, and tell them to reject or to fight the permitting reform bill. Or if you're interested in looking into this more, you can just Google Manchin's dirty side deal. That's kind of the name that it's picked up and that has been popularized. So that's a really clear call to action to reach out to them today, because they're going to vote on this bill on September 30th. And so it's really important that we all push against this this dirty side deal and make sure that that's not folded into the Inflation Reduction Act. And then finally, you know, just sign up for our newsletter, because we try to keep folks up to date on these types of call to actions, on these types of current events. So signing up for our newsletter is a good way to just stay involved, stay engaged, and stay informed on all of these issues.
Thank you for all of that, Jade. I'm just over here madly responding to all the different questions and thoughts that are coming in as we close out. I know we're a little over time, but for those that might need to leave, again, I just want to say that we're going to send out a recording. But while we have Dr. Basu here with us, I would love if we could answer some questions, because there were some incredible questions that came through. And I just want people to have that opportunity to be able to learn from your expertise in real time. And so one that came through was, can you explain wet bulb temperature and how that feels like temperature can be harder on our bodies?
Yeah, thanks, Kyla. That one's an important one. And honestly, we didn't talk enough about humidity today. So, temperature is a complicated thing, and getting to the point of where my knowledge ends a little bit. But temperature and humidity together can create different dynamics in which the heat is heavier, thicker. And so all heat is not the same is probably the biggest message. So humidity is another factor to be thinking about. And the wet bulb measurements is like a metric of explaining the combinations of kind of heat and humidity together. So I honestly don't enough. I should be watching those metrics, but I would say maybe at a bare minimum, we should be conscious and aware of what kind of humidity is coming along with heat.
And then another great question that I had pulled was on the heat and health side. This person had typed, you mentioned pregnant women. And so do you know anything about the reproductive system as a whole? This person said, I was just teaching in Italy in July, and it was 103 degrees Fahrenheit most days. one of my bleeding coworkers experienced super heavy cycles the entire time we were there, and I was curious if the heat and stress had an effect on their cycles.
Yeah, I saw Brett's response there, who's a birth doula, and I don't know much about that. I have not seen studies about it. I kind of try to keep my eyes peeled out for studies on these. So I haven't seen that study, but everything Brett says, I really appreciate, and I'm learning from the comments there. Maybe what I'll make the point of is that a lot of the research and science that we're trying to understand about these things, like we're kind of catching up a lot, and that's why I hope that, work in educating and activating health professionals to study this, to educate folks more, is a really important piece of this. But a lot of like how much it impacts, or what the counseling that we give medically, comes from studies and all that. So I appreciate what Brett's saying, and I'm learning here about it because I didn't know about it. Yeah.
And then let's see here. There was a lot of good questions that came in. I'm curious, Dr. Basu, if there was any additional 1 to 2 on your end that you wanted to answer. And maybe while you're looking through that, I could just give some brief answers to some of the logistical questions. Let's see here.
Yeah. There was a lot, I saw some comments trickle in about how to protect yourselves in our home. Many of us don't have AC. I don't have an AC system. I do think I really appreciate the kind of call to actions that Jade had presented, because we are starting to activate policy to finally respond to some of these needs. We are behind, there's no question about that, but it was really important for that federal bill to pass, and many of these state bills that Jade was talking about are really important. So I like to talk about some of these over coffee and sit one-on-one with people. I don't think having any broad comments about hope or despair is useful, because we're all experiencing it in our own ways, and who am I to tell someone to feel hopeful or despair? But what I would say is that we are, and a lot because of what NDN is doing here, is that I think we are entering an era in which we are starting to identify these major gaps we have. I didn't know what a heat pump was until very recently, and I said, why aren't we doing that all the time? And so one thing that gives me a little courage and hope when I feel really worried about this stuff is I truly believe that humans are extraordinary, and there are a lot of really good, really like impactful solutions, and we have to scale those, and we have to create kind of guiding principles about our society, that we're going to prioritize people's health, we're going to prioritize the health of our planet, and I think we are now that the studies I'm showing about people's understanding and consciousness and their political activity around climate has just extraordinarily changed. And so I saw some comments of like, this is really hard and overwhelming information. I do believe we have a lot that we can do to mitigate and adapt to these threats, and I hope we touched upon some of them today.
Yeah, thank you. I want to just appreciate Dr. Basu for coming and sharing so much insight, knowledge, wisdom with us today. It was a true pleasure to be able to share space. And a lot of the comments as well that came in, and just wanting to say, Jade answered them, but there were some comments around, can I share this presentation with, on social media with different community members or schools? The answer is yes. We're trying to create more resources that can be open source and that people can, utilize and build upon, and additionally contextualize, and in terms of where it is that you are living, and what are maybe even some of the conditions, weather-wise, geographically, and politically, that you need to be responding to. So our materials are here for you all to be a resource. And as I had shared at the beginning, We will be providing more materials, more educational materials on extreme heat over the coming months, because it's something that, you know, we feel really strongly about, making sure people are more aware of in general. And then as a last thought, I wanted to say there were a lot of different comments that came in around what my community has or doesn't have. And, you know, we have a saying here at NDN Collective that I feel like is a really, you know, some good closing words. We oftentimes, you know, we like to say to each other and outwardly, now is the time to be organizing forward. So we're really at the core of it, our organization, we're a movement organization, and we're, you know, made up of organizers, and even some of the roles that might be a little, you know, I think we might consider like less like activism, you know, in really a lot of ways we're about supporting communities in skilling up and having more tools, and being able to have access to and leverage resources. We're, you know, at the core of it, we're organizers. And so that's the, you know, what I would like to bring to all of you as some last words, is that there are opportunities in all of our communities to be jumpstarting conversations with local elected officials about things like cooling centers and where cooling centers should be, and what they should be comprised of. And also jumpstarting conversations just about, you know, broad education on all sorts of issues related to climate change. And so we really hope that this webinar today can be a point of empowerment for all of you that are out there doing the good work. And we just really want to say that we're with you, and we hear you, and we're certainly, we feel you on so many different levels. So thank you again. And it's 7:47 a.m. for me. I know for some of you it's in the afternoon. So I'm feeling really grateful to be able to be jumpstarting the rest of my Friday with being able to spend time with you all today. So that is it for now, and keep an eye out on your inboxes for the follow-up recording and presentation slides as well. Thank you.